Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to another Live with Kevin, another future episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad that you are here. And I know that some of you are watching this recorded, and I'm still glad that you're here. But if you're with us live, I hope that you will start by saying hello, telling us where you're from. And I'll put some of those on the screen in a little bit. But I'd just love to know who's here, where they're coming from, where they're at today. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm so glad that you are here. While you're here, I want you to imagine that you are joining my guest and I around a table. We're having a cup of coffee or a glass of water or whatever your beverage of choice would be. And if we were doing that, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you'd offer it. And so I hope that you will do exactly that here. You just won't be able to do it verbally. You'll have to do it by typing. But I hope that you'll do that. When you do that, we'll have a better conversation. And when you do that, it will be a better podcast episode as well. And I thank you in advance. But also when you do that, you have a chance to get your questions answered. You get the chance today to be with a true leadership thought leader. So if you've got a question, you can ask it. And if we can work it into what we're doing, I promise you, I'll ask our guest. So I'm so glad that you're here. So what I'm going to do now is tell you that if you love this, you're also going to love our upcoming event, September 20th and 21st, called Virtual Leader Con. And you can learn more by going to virtualleadercon.com. I'm going to put that on the screen here for you. So please go to virtualleadercon.com. You can learn all about that event. Our guest today was on a past previous year when we did Virtual LeaderCon. We'd love to have you join us. Again, if you love these kinds of conversations, you will love Virtual LeaderCon. I hope you'll do that. Now, I'm about ready now to get ready to queue up what will eventually become the podcast, because people on the podcast didn't hear all the stuff I've just said to you, right? So what I'm going to do now is do a countdown, and we'll get ready to start the podcast in 3, 2, 1. We can and do talk often here about the skills that can help us as leaders. These are valuable conversations. But what about the inner journey that we take ourselves as a leader and how that relates to our leadership effectiveness? That is our focus today, our inner journey. And we're doing that with one of the top leadership experts in the world. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us in the future live on your favorite social media outlet. You can get all of those future access to those future live episodes, find out where they're taking place, and get this information sooner, because the conversation we're having today on the 6th of September won't come out live on the podcast till the 1st of November. So if you want to know about what's coming up and getting involved, you can do that by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn, and you can do exactly that. Today's episode is brought to you by our latest book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more at longdistanceteambook.com, where you can get an excerpt and get plenty of ideas, insights, as well as where you can get your copy, longdistanceteambook.com. So now I'm going to bring in our guest, bring him in right here, Mr. Dan Rockwell, famous in so many ways. Let me introduce him to you now very quickly. Dan is an author of the highly recognized Leadership Freak blog. He's also the author of a brand new book, a co-author of this book called The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership. His concise and practical articles have been read in every country on the planet. Inc. magazine recognizes Dan as a top 50 leadership expert in the English-speaking world and a top 100 speaker. The American Management Association lists Dan as a top 30 leader in business, and he is our guest. We determined earlier that we first met based on his notes, meaning electronically, 12 years ago. And Dan, I'm so glad to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Kevin, thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity to see you again and to work to add value to your audience. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So before we get to the book and everything there, I think it's interesting. So you truly have one of the most read, maybe the most read blog on leadership. And you told me earlier you started it in 2010. No one woke up when they were 6 and said, of course, when you were 6, there were no blogs, but no one woke up and said, I think I'm going to write a leadership blog, or I'm going to become an expert on leadership. So tell us a little bit about your journey that gets you here. Let's just start there for a second.
Sure. I think dissatisfaction is a very useful thing and probably has played an important role, not probably, has played an important role in my life and been central to pivotal moments. And so I had a midlife crisis somewhere around 45 or 7 or something. I don't remember. I've had a lot of midlife crisis, so it's kind of hard to pick them all out. We ought to have a lot.
You try to decide which one is when you decided to do this versus which one is when you bought the Porsche. I don't know.
Yeah. And unbuttoned my shirt and wore a gold chain. Thankfully, we didn't go that far. But I was going through a time where you evaluate your life and you start to think maybe you have more in you. I had no idea what writing a blog meant. I just knew that it was a channel available to me, and I thought, well, I'll give it a try for a year, and if it gets traction, I'll keep doing it. And a few months in, it started getting subscribers from different countries, and people started sending me books, and I was very fortunate. But it got some traction. So it was really dissatisfaction with myself and with my life, which was a time to think about doing that.
Well, here's the thing about dissatisfaction in any case. Like, no change is going to happen without dissatisfaction. Yeah. Like, you can have a picture of a future, but until you see that future as being better, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, right? Yeah. No dissatisfaction, no change, right? So I love that, using that word in this process. So you co-wrote this book. It's a business parable. So some people who are listening will say, oh, I love business parables. And others will say, oh, I don't necessarily love business parables. So let's just start there. Why write it as a parable? Sort of how did you get to, we'll get to the content of the book. I'm not going to give anything about the book away, but why write a book? Why take so long? Why write a book, and why parable?
Right. A lot of people ask me how come I didn't have a book out, because I've been writing for 10, 12 years, and they just thought, there must be a book somewhere. Why don't you just put your blogs together and do that? You know what I mean? So
people have done that. Not
yes.
Successfully, but people have done that.
Yes. I'm going to be honest with you, Kevin. I didn't write a book until now because I just didn't feel in my heart like I was equipped, big enough for it as a person. Now, that's a very candid thing for me to say to you. And I don't mean like I didn't have a big enough audience. I had a big enough audience. I have one that will help, people are interested. But it just was daunting to me. And this book came about as an answer to some of those apprehensions about writing a book. Because I write 300 words a day. So it takes me a couple hours to get, on average, to get 300 words out every day. So I rise early, I write. There is a colossal difference between writing 300s a day on whatever suits your fancy and actually writing a book. That's when I contacted John David Mann, and he's very experienced, and the parable suits the topic. I typically don't write in that format, and that was another reason to invite the outside in, which is really a very transformative thing for all of us, is you reach out, bring people into your life. Your life gets bigger when you bring people in. John David Mann is one of the very best at writing business parables. And so I contacted him, and he was like, let's go get him. He thought it was a great idea. I told him the story in brief, and he thought it was a great idea.
And if you don't know John David Mann, everybody, he is the co-author of probably one of the 5 or 10 best-selling business parables of all time. I'm guessing, I don't have the data in front of me, called The Go-Giver with my friend Bob Berg, and several other offshoots of that. So all right. So the subtitle of this book, it's called The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership. So why decide to write about the inner journey?
Well, when I started out, I thought that, uh, leadership and management is about do these 5 things, 5 steps to this, 10 steps to that. And by the way, I write a lot about that. But I did come to find out that there was a lot more to leadership. And so I started hearing these things from really smart people. And that's one of the things that will really change your life is that bring some smart people into your life. And I started talking to authors. I started talking to people like you. And, then you get somebody like Warren Bennis, who says leadership is becoming yourself, nothing more, nothing less. Then I had a conversation with Frances Hesselbein. She was the CEO of the Girl Scouts. And she said, leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. Freaked me out. Just freaked me out. So as time went by, I started to realize that authentic leadership is really about who we are. So now we have I have a whole new journey to go on. We all do. It's not just about learning skills. Skills are necessary, but it's also about becoming who you are and then bringing that person to the world.
So you didn't say this exactly. I put quotes around it. I know you're going to agree with the statement, but I sort of put it together to make it a quote here. Talent, skill, and drive aren't enough. You say at the end of the book. So say a little. I mean, you've now hinted at this, and I hinted at this in the opening to the show. But do you want to say any more about that? Talent, skill, and drive aren't enough.
Yeah, disappointing, isn't it?
Well, leadership is extraordinarily complex.
Yeah.
Those 3 would be enough to be complex, but the point of that's also about us, right?
Yes.
Is a huge piece. So is anything more you want to say about that?
Absolutely. So what I find is highly talented leaders who are highly successful, driven people, they come up to a point in their life. I talk with them all the time, and they started to hate their lives. They started not to find fulfillment in work anymore. They have lost themselves to work. And so, bringing us all back to that brings us back to where the energy comes from, where the drive, where the purpose is, where you it isn't just running great meetings. That's important. It isn't just having great one-on-ones. That's necessary. It's really bringing your best self to every situation and being aware of that. That's where the inner journey comes in. Yeah.
It's interesting. During the pandemic, we got asked to talk in part because of the long distance leader book, which was out before the COVID, and we got asked to talk a lot about mental health and that kind of stuff. And one of the things I said, you can't be at be at your best for your team, which you want to be, unless you're ready to be your best self. And we were talking about it at that time, mostly about you can't be burnout, you can't be running on empty, you can't those sorts of things. So you got to take care of yourself before you can take care of your team. But you're saying that, and you're saying more than that. So take that and go a little further with that.
Sure. I think the feeling I get, like I asked, the first time this really hit me was about 10 years ago. And I had a conversation with Jim Parker, who was the former CEO of Southwest Airlines. And I said, hey, Jim, what do you love to tell young leaders? He said, I love to tell them to be yourself. And it's like, that's the most underwhelming thing I think I've heard. It's like, what the heck is that? We're going to go out and hug trees? That's hippie talk. You know what I mean? It's like, be yourself. I had no idea what that meant. It took me a while to figure out. And I had 2 other conversations within 60 days that really revolutionized the way I thought about leadership. But it took me a while to realize that Jim was the CEO of Southwest during 9/11. And he said, look, you're going to have people coming into your life, and they're going to pull you in different directions. And one person will come in, they'll want to pull you this way. And another person will come in, they'll want to pull you another way. If you don't have your bearings, if you don't know who you are, every idea sounds great. You're going to chase things all over the place. You need to know who you are. So that's a beginning. It still feels like grasping at the wind, like become who you are. It's like, no, No, what are you talking about? Communicate effectively, plan effectively, create milestones and goals and all of those other things. And that's all important. But
But you can't even do those well, really, without the other part, because there's a difference between a tactic and something that will really work, right?
Yes, yes. And there's such power here, Kevin. Once we get a feel for like who we are, then we start to know what to do. And this connection between I would call it identity-based leadership. Once we get a feel for who we are, then we start to understand what to do. Because there are certain things that you're going to be great at and you ought to do a lot of them. You ought to keep doing them. And there are going to be certain things that you just aren't natural at doing. And you need to do very few of, you don't need to do that much, get somebody else to do it. I'll give you an illustration that helps you get the idea of identity-based living in particular. Back in the day, we had a friend who his son was a state champion wrestler. So if you're familiar with wrestling, that's like, that's huge. That's a very individual sport.
Yep.
And we would be sitting down to dinner and we would be eating like fried chicken and we would be eating dessert and everything. And he would be over there eating like
5 pieces.
Yeah. Like it's like protein, not a lot of this. And he did not have a problem with that because his perception of himself was that he was a wrestler, and wrestlers don't eat all this stuff while they're getting ready. He was living into and really out of who he was. And so he was able then to make decisions and know the things he wanted to do and the things that he didn't want to do. If you're a sprinter and you're on the starting line and someone walks by with a cherry pie and you love cherry pie and they're ready to start the race, you don't even see it. You don't even notice it. Why? Because you're focused in on your whole being is here, right? Hence, you get a little bit of flow here too, but that's an illustration of identity-based leadership. And working with leaders to get them to this place is such a wonderful and powerful idea. And that's where the inner journey comes in.
Okay, so here's the challenge, or here's the opportunity. Okay, be who we are, identity-based, get all that. I think everyone who's listening, while they may not know exactly how to do it, they get what you're saying. And yet we cross the razor to the other side of, well, that just means I just need to be who I am. And I don't have to heck with anything else. Everyone has to accept who I am because that's who I am. Like I'm crappy at math. So,
yes,
like how do we live the beauty of what you're saying without crossing the Rubicon?
Yes. I'm so glad you bring this up. I just want to, pull my hair out when somebody says, I just got to be myself. And that's an excuse for entitlement.
Exactly. Or excuse to not learn, excuse to not grow.
Yes. Right. It's like, well, I'm just not good at that. So everybody's going to have to adjust to my inability to do whatever. No. So I like to think about aspirational self. And to me, that satisfies the idea of identity-based leadership not being just indulgent, this is who I am, doesn't matter. So if you aspire to be a great leader, see, now you have a feel for now, what does the kind of leader you can become look like? If you aspire to be a great leader, you're going to have to run great meetings. Right now, most everybody sucks at running meetings. So
even though we've been teaching people how to do it for 30, I've been teaching people how to do it for 30 years. Clearly, I'm not very good at it.
I know you. I know you have.
So I don't want to give the book away because people, by the way, we were talking with Dan Rockwell, the co-author of the brilliant new book, The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership. We're talking about the inner journey of leadership. We're not going to talk about, I'm not going to tell you the story. I wouldn't want to tell you the story. But I will tell you that the star of the story, the protagonist of the story, is a talented dude. he aspired to be an effective leader. He expected to be really good. And yet, I think I can say this much. He stumbled over himself. And you use that phrase in the book. So like, why is it that even if we are aspiring to be good at this, and I think we have a self-selected group listening, like you're not listening to this or watching this if you don't care about leadership. Like, so we're kind of preaching to the choir. I get that. And yet you would say we still stumble over ourselves. Say a little bit more about that.
Yes. So when I got up this morning, I didn't wake up thinking, I want to like screw up really bad today. I want to be wrong all the time. I want to do stupid things. I want to hinder I want to start collecting rocks and put them in my pockets and just walk around carrying unnecessary weight. I woke up thinking I'm right. I woke up thinking I know where to go. So you have these high aspiration, high talented people who don't quite understand that they're shooting, that this is what's important here and part of the story. We all do self-defeating things. We all engage in self-defeating behaviors. And the problem with this is we tend to think it's the other person. It's not us. And so in the story, the protagonist is Bob. And Bob is, a high talented, high performing leader in a healthcare organization who really feels like he's doing all the right stuff.
Thinks he's about ready to be promoted again.
He's going to be moving up the chain, and he finds out that he's not. And the whole story, John puts it this way: we take Bob and just beat the daylights out of him through the whole story. You know what I'm saying?
Boy, you do.
Yeah.
Like you do. There's no doubt about it.
And by the way, I love how that all turned out. It just spirals downward, and it appeals to my positive spirit, I guess. But we do things that hurt ourselves, and we think we're helping, and we're really hindering. And so the story is an opportunity to reflect on that.
So the book to me, I mean, yes, and yes. And the book to me ends up being, or the message of the book ends up being about our blind spots.
Yes.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the end of the book, the nonfiction part of the book at the very end, the take home part, if you will, what you call reflection projects. But before we talk about any of those particular, and I think I want to bring up one specifically, but what would you say in general that we need to do? How do we as leaders reveal our own blind spots?
Yes. This is where self-reflection done in isolation leads to self-deception, right? So we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We should. Right. And we get up and we're trying to do well, and we're thinking like this is the right thing to do. And so to counteract that, this is where bringing the outside in is so important. So engaging in self-reflection with other people so that they can explain, and you can then see, oh, well, I thought I was doing this. Right. So I received some, all the bad things Bob did, I did all of them, in the story. All these self-defeating behaviors, they're all mine. And I have a list longer than the ones that Bob had that it's very humbling, by the way, to read this story. Although it's dramatized, the screw ups that Bob did, I did. So I got to be careful here. I'm not saying I did everything that Bob did in the story.
It's not an autobiographical story.
No. But anyway,
But they have to model it on somebody, Dan. It might as well be us, right?
Yeah, it might as well be a real screw up. So that is unintentional when we engage in self-defeating behaviors. So I had someone say to me, and I actually had more than one person say to me, you can be pushy. Now that hurts my feelings. I'm not pushy. I'm a fuzzy teddy bear. My daughter told me one time, as an adult, she told me, I think you like to scare people. I don't want to scare anybody.
Not my intention.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. We judge ourselves by our intentions. So, bringing the outside in, listening to those voices, especially if you get two or three people saying the same thing to you. So you reflect on yourself and then you say, well, where is that behavior? What am I doing when that happens? I thought I was doing this. And it can be a difficult process, that's for sure.
Which takes me, so in the back of the book, everybody, there are these reflection projects, and there's also some really good stuff if you want to use this parable in a book club sort of mode. So if you want to say something about that in a minute, you can, Dan, but I want to have you talk a little bit about project 3. I'm just going to read from it. It says, consider your impact on the people around you. And I don't want to read too much of it because you're talking about Bob, but you do say Bob stumbled over himself because he had distorted assumptions about other people's perceptions and responses. He thought he had deep relationships and they were shallow. I won't go on because there's foreshadowing there. Talk to us about how we do that. How can we do a better job of considering our impact on the people around us?
Great question. And I'll give you something very specific. So let's suppose we talked about meetings a few times and you've been training people on meetings. Let's suppose you say, I want to run meetings that have a sense of trajectory. Now, that would be a noble goal for most any leader. So you go to a couple of your trusted colleagues and you tell them ahead of time, I'm working to create a sense of energy in this meeting. Would you monitor the meeting? Notice when things start to dip. Notice when things go up. Notice what I'm doing. Notice what I'm not doing. Right. But I just want I'm trying to lead a really great meeting, but it's maybe not. So then after the meeting, that's when you do a very quick, immediate debrief, walking down the hallway. What did you notice? And now you have all this great material to start thinking about how am I showing up?
It's a great example. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. Number one is you get all of that. The other thing that you get is, so I'm going to add to your story. So I just went to some training and learned how to do, there's some things I want to do about better meetings. I'm specifically trying to do this, this, and this. Will you give me that feedback? So not only do I get all of that about how I'm impacting others, that it might reveal my blind spot, but I'm also telling my team that I'm trying to improve, which improves the chances that they will want to improve, role modeling. And the third thing is it's showing people that when we take training, we do something with it.
Yes.
Right. So I just added a small little piece to your story, but the point is it does do everything you said, which is incredibly important. It also happens to role model some really great behaviors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the modeling of a learner. Tell people what you're reading, tell people what you're learning, share your goal to the whole team. I'm working on running great meetings. I'm working on having great one-on-ones. I'm working on improving my planning skills. This is what I'm trying to do. Love your feedback. Make that all public so that when you go to them and say, let's work on XYZ, you're on level ground with them.
100%, like 100%, for sure. So, okay. So other than buying a copy of the book and reading it, and then you can do it, everybody, like I did in one setting, 135 pages before you get to the reflection at the back. The book is called The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership. And before or when we're reading the book or whatever, Dan, where should people start? If people want to work on their inner journey, what's the first thing they should do?
Well, obviously, if you read the book, take note of when you see yourself in the story. That's good. So I have people sending me notes, early readers who are sending me notes, and they're saying, I saw myself. One of the very early readers said, I wondered if the book was about me. Right. And it wasn't, but, the feeling of gee, this is something that's happened to me too. And that's the reason,
real, right? It feels real.
Yeah, and that's the reason for the parable format, which I don't typically write in. It gives the reader a chance to slip into the character and identify with Bob, and then you start to see yourself, and you start to wonder. I wonder if I'm having some of these things too. Bingo! Then the book has really got us on the right path.
So I want to say one more thing about the book format, and then I've got a couple more questions before we start to wrap up. One is I've read a lot of these parables, as have you, including some that your co-author wrote. And it's so funny. Before I picked this up to read it, I was thinking, okay, I usually end up liking them, and there's a formula to them that almost all of them follow. And all I'm going to say to you all, if you've noticed that, this one doesn't follow it. So, and I'm not going to say any more about that, other than that, this one doesn't follow that formula really at all. And I thought it was going to, or I'm just going to tell you this. I thought early on it was going to.
Yeah.
When he walks out of the building, I thought, aha, I have found the format. Here comes nope, it didn't happen, which is one of the things, other things I loved about the book as a reader.
Wonderful.
So thinking about this as an individual is one thing. Thinking about this, if someone is here as a senior leader, someone's here in HR, in organizational development and leadership development, and if you are, I'm glad you're here. What insights, if any, what would you want to share with people thinking about this, not just for them, but organizationally? What's your organizational thought about how we can start to help all of our leaders in our organization go on this inner journey?
Sure. Go public. Obviously read the book, but, and read it as a team. I just got an email today, hey, we want this for our team, et cetera. And that's exciting to me because it gives you a chance afterwards to do some things together. And I think that's really necessary, is think about how do you practice self-reflection openly? How do you practice authentic leadership organizationally? Here's a very simple little project too, thinking about bringing energy into work, is just ask your team to monitor their own energy and then notice what are they doing when energy is up and energy is down. Monitor their team's energy. And then and this is so good, I have to tell you, when you see somebody light up, you stop them right then and say, we were just going along and all of a sudden, boom, you went bright. What's going on for you? And listen closely, because now you're starting to get to the heart of what really drives them.
I love that. Again, it takes us back to, if we as senior leaders, as people in leadership development, training development, whatever, we need to be modeling these same things. Like, we can't just say, hey, you all need to work on your inner journey. Like, that's not going to be good enough, right? So I have a couple of other things, Dan, before we finish, and a couple of questions I always like to ask people. Here's the first one. Like, okay, we're not talking about writing. I know 300 words a day on the blog, leadershipfreak.blog. I get that. But what do you do for fun?
Yeah, spend time with my wife. I'm an introvert. I love the back deck and nobody around. If you drive into my driveway, I'm going to hide behind the couch until you leave. And I'll keep
that in mind, Dan.
Actually, I love people, but I also love that quiet time. And obviously, I'm a grandfather with 6 grandchildren, and that's about all the fun I can stand these days.
Well, I know one thing that maybe you wouldn't call it fun, but that I know that you enjoy, like me, and that is reading. So tell me something that you're reading now or you've read recently.
Sure. Well, I read a lot of books at the same time. I've given myself permission to not finish crappy books. So if I start to read, I don't feel like I'm a failure if I stop partway through. And because I read several books at once, I read them relatively slowly. I'm reading The Midnight Library. It's a fiction book. I forget the author's name. And enjoying that. Every night I read the Daily Stoic. This year, I'm reading the Daily Stoic, which is just a daily reflection on Stoicism. I also read every night excerpts from The Art of Worldly Wisdom. It's an old book, 1700s, written by Balthazar something, Balthazar Gracian. I don't know how you say that. E.B. White is my favorite author in the world, and I almost always read some of his stuff every day. Robert Frost recently, and then finally every day I read on writing. I have 2 or 3 things I want to do in my life. One is I want to live a simple life. 2 is I want to be really good at writing, and 3 is I want to be really good at coaching. So I try to do something to improve myself in those areas every day. So I always read about writing as well.
Cool. I bet we've read some of the same stuff there too. So, you came here and we knew we would have a good chat, and we have had a good chat. But the thing that prompted you being here, let's be clear, was this new book, The Vagrant. So where do you want to point people in terms of the book? Where do you want to point people in terms of where they can connect with you? Here's your chance.
Sure. Any of the major outlets will have it. And so Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or as we say with our grandchildren, Barnes and Knoble, because we have Knoble's amusement park nearby, or any of those major online outlets.
Well, Barnes and Noble is an amusement park. Let's just be amusement park for the mind, right?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And you can reach me at dan@leadershipfreak.com, or just Google Leadership Freak. So far, that's what you'll get is me. So
Leadership Freak blog, leadershipfreak.com, all that'll work, right? And you can get to the book from there as well as all those other outlets. So Dan, I've been looking forward to this. I talked to my friend who you were just on his podcast, Jeff Brown. And just about 30 minutes before we started, he said to tell you hello. So I know I'm running in good company when I'm talking to the same people that Jeff's talking to. We'll put the link to Jeff's blog, who's been on this show, by the way, in there. And we'll put the link to the books that Dan just mentioned, as well as The Vagrant in the show notes. Dan, thanks so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a privilege and a pleasure.
Before we go, everybody, the question I ask you every single week applies here, of course. I mean, we've been talking about reflection, so I'm going to ask you to reflect on the last, 30 minutes or so of your life. And the question is, now what? What action will you take as a result of being here? I mean, other than buying a book. My hope is that you've thought about this. A couple of things that I wrote down. One is that we all do self-defeating behaviors, and then we try to blame somebody else. So are you doing that? How are you doing that? What are those things? Are you engaging others that you work with in helping you find your blind spots? Are you engaging others in helping you reach your goals? Are you being the role model that you could be in the kinds of ways that Dan and I talked about today? The question is not, what did you learn? The question is, what will you do with what you learned? That's what I hope that you will take from today. I hope that you will connect with Dan. I hope you will get a copy of his books. I hope that you will connect with me on LinkedIn. And I hope you'll be back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.